Hey guys, today I'll show you a horror TV series named Freakish Season 2. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The drama begins at Kent High School after the freak apocalypse, which was caused by an accidental explosion in a chemical plant. Now the students in the school became some of the few survivors. They had to be constantly on guard against freaks, while also dealing with waves of armed personnel sent by the chemical factory to silence them. Grover and his friends managed to make their enemies believe they had left the school, but the policewoman injured Sean before leaving with her henchmen, leaving Sean exposed to the freak horde. Thankfully, Grover and the others in the classroom appeared just in time to kill the approaching freaks. Although Sean was saved, his leg was severely fractured and could only be temporarily fixed with a wooden board, losing his mobility. As Grover and his companions were cleaning up the hallway, a stranger approached the entrance of the school building. This man could move freely in the fog and had a noticeable scar on his neck. Previously, Sean had encountered dissected corpses and tortured living people at the police station, all with similar scars on their necks. However, only Barrett, who had investigated the chemical factory, might have known the hidden truth. They were still conducting live experiments, and the armed personnel who had invaded the school and injured Sean were sent by the chemical factory to eliminate witnesses. To cover up the truth of the explosion caused by the experiment, they had killed countless innocent people. These people were even more terrifying than the real freaks. Although Sean seemed in good condition now, Zoe knew that as a diabetic, any wound could potentially become ulcerated, and he needed to inject antibiotics in time. Unfortunately, Zoe had been to the school infirmary before, but didn't find any medicine. Grover thought there must be medicine in the ambulance that Sean had driven back, so he decided to take a risk and go check. Under the heartfelt urging of his girlfriend Violet, Grover put on his protective gear, strapped on the gas mask for his dog, and went to the ambulance not far from the school alone. There, he searched everywhere but couldn't find any antibiotics. Just as Grover was about to leave, he noticed a group of freaks passing by, completely ignoring him and heading straight towards the school. Meanwhile, the survivors inside the school also noticed something was off. Diesel had just encountered a freak in the corridor. After knocking it down with a bat, he discovered a piece of clothing wrapped around the freak's leg, the same clothing his girlfriend Natalie wore. As he sat down in despair, the freak got up again, but instead of attacking, it let out a strange cry and continued to move forward. Even when Diesel knocked it down, the freak kept trying to crawl as if attracted to something. Diesel quickly informed Barrett, who also thought something was wrong, and rushed to the entrance to find a large number of freaks gathered outside, letting out strange cries and constantly banging on the door. Barrett speculated that something must have happened to cause the abnormal behavior of the freaks. At that moment, Zoe ran over and said that Sean's condition had worsened and he had fallen into a coma. Barrett noticed that Sean's wound was severely infected with a faint stench. This was probably the reason that the freaks, with their keen sense of smell, were agitated. Knowing the severity of the situation, everyone hurried to the entrance to reinforce the door to prevent the freaks from breaking in. Barrett thought that this was not a long-term solution and suggested that Sean's limb should be amputated as soon as possible. Violet argued that there were no medical supplies or operating tables, so would they use a saw? Barrett also got angry, asking if they all wanted to die with Sean. At this moment, Zoe came out and said that Sean had a fever, so she went to the kitchen to get some ice. Violet was called by another man to help, as the freaks outside were getting more and more crazy, and a considerable number of freaks had also gathered at the side door. Left alone, Barrett went into the room, where Sean already knew the reason for the freaks' agitation. It asked Barrett to kill Sean and protect Zoe. Outside the corridor, the cries of the freaks grew louder, and the force against the door increased. Violet and Diesel were struggling to hold on, and Zoe was also disturbed by the noise. However, in the next moment, all the cries suddenly stopped, and the freaks retreated. Zoe immediately realized something and rushed into the room, screaming Sean's name. As expected, Sean had stopped breathing, and the survival team lost another member. When Zoe finally calmed down, Barrett comforted her, saying that she should be glad Sean died quickly without suffering too long. Suddenly, they heard a noise coming from the next room, and it turned out to be a group of strangers inside. Behind them was Grover, who had just returned from searching for medicine. Learning that Sean had died, Grover felt very guilty. He should have come back earlier. Barrett asked Grover about the 6 people in the lounge. Grover began to recount his experience searching for medicine. He had searched the ambulance for a long time but could not find the necessary antibiotics. He had no choice but to try his luck at a nearby pharmacy. The pharmacy's door was locked, and there were no freaks in sight. More importantly, the medicines were well stocked. Just as he was about to loot the place, he was suddenly knocked out. When Grover woke up again, he found out that a young man named Zane was responsible. Fortunately, the man didn't have any ill intentions and realized that Grover wasn't a bad person, so he returned the confiscated gun to him. Then several men and women appeared from behind the shelves. They were all survivors who had come to the pharmacy one after another. When they learned that Grover was staying at a nearby school, they saw an opportunity. The school's cafeteria must have had plenty of food. The girl named Anka immediately suggested that they all go there together. Zane thought that if they stayed in the pharmacy, they wouldn't last more than 3 days. After some thought, Grover agreed to let them join. After listening to the story, Barrett knew that this was bad news. Allowing a group of strangers with unknown backgrounds to enter the school was not only a risk to their safety, but also a concern for their limited food supply. Sure enough, Zoe struck up a conversation with these newcomers and unintentionally discovered that Zane was a security guard at the chemical plant. Many of them even had handguns. No wonder Zane returned Grover's gun. He didn't need it. Grover secretly approached Zane, asking him to hand over his gun because the people from the chemical plant were trying to harm them. Zane reassured Grover, saying he was just a security guard and had no knowledge of what was happening inside the plant. Despite his words, Zane refused to hand over the gun. Violet walked in, revealing that she was Zane's ex-girlfriend. Although the scene was somewhat dramatic, Violet knew Zane well enough to know that he wouldn't do anything harmful on behalf of the chemical plant. After hearing this, Grover let down his guard. However, Zane, as an ex-boyfriend, advised Grover to cherish his life and stay away from Violet, reminding him of the time she had installed explosives in his own car. Although the chemical plant's subsequent actions indicated that the explosion wasn't caused by Violet, it was enough to show her recklessness. Upon hearing this, Grover was immediately taken aback. The attentive Violet noticed Grover's reaction and explained that her actions were a result of Zane's infidelity while they were dating. She assured Grover that she was usually rational, and her words eventually eased Grover's concerns. As the two were entangled in their issues, their companions were on guard against these newcomers, suspecting they had ulterior motives. That night, Anka woke up her brother Ollie, and they quietly went to the second floor, seemingly searching for something. They were soon discovered by the patrolling Diesel, who almost shot them. This incident caused quite a stir. Anka explained that they were just looking for a more comfortable place to sleep, but Grover and the others were skeptical. Barrett took the opportunity to demand the confiscation of their guns. Anka was the first to hand over her weapon, followed by her brother, and finally, the reluctant Zane. Diesel immediately put the guns in the office, unaware that the scheming Anka still had a gun hidden in her bag. In contrast to this complicated brother-sister pair, the skateboarder who entered with them was much simpler. He didn't meddle in anything and spent his time skateboarding in the hallway. One day, while he was roaming alone, he heard a noise from a neighboring room. Upon entering, he discovered a strange man stealing everyone's guns. The man was actually an experimental subject from the chemical plant who could withstand poisonous gas. Instead of breaking into the building, he had chosen to sneak in. The skateboarder immediately tried to stop him, but the experimental man had incredible combat skills and quickly defeated the skateboarder with a single move. On the other hand, Zoe had always been confused about why her boyfriend had died so suddenly. She asked Barrett, who was there at the time, for details. He told Zoe that before Sean passed away, he said he loved her very much and then peacefully fell asleep. Just then, Grover came running to Barrett, asking him to go upstairs to check on something. It turned out that the handguns handed over by Zane and the others had disappeared. Grover and the others believed that it must have been the work of the newcomers, so they immediately locked them in a room. Grover asked Diesel to look for the missing skateboarder and another girl, while he and Barrett interrogated the people in front of them about who had stolen the guns. Anka was full of pride, asking what right they had to lock her up. Barrett said that if they didn't hand over the guns, they would die here. At this moment, Ollie suddenly sat down on the ground, panting heavily. Anka said that his fear had taken over and hurriedly searched for medicine in her bag. Fearing for the boy's life, Zoe and Violet rummaged through the backpack. They saw Ollie's real name on the medicine bottle. His last name was the same as the owner of the chemical plant. This was unique in their small town, and under the questioning of Grover and the others, the two siblings finally admitted that they were the biological children of the owner of the chemical plant. Grover and the others panicked, wondering what the siblings' purpose was in coming to the school. Anka explained that if they hadn't chosen to hide their identity, they wouldn't have been taken in. Although they were innocent, Barrett insisted that the siblings were up to something, questioning why they had gone upstairs in the middle of the night. Moreover, the people from the chemical plant had been trying to kill everyone to silence them. Meanwhile, Diesel, who had been searching for the two missing newcomers, found one of them in the hallway. As they split up to look for the remaining skateboarder, the girl discovered a blood-stained storage locker and screamed. Diesel caught a glimpse of a man with a backpack running away, but didn't have time to chase him as he rushed to help his companion. It turned out that the skateboarder had been killed and stuffed into the locker, indicating that someone else had stolen the guns. Zane and the others were finally cleared of suspicion and released from the isolation room. However, the two siblings had to stay put because they were the children of the chemical plant owner. With no other choice, Anka finally revealed that they had a signal transmitter that, once activated, would send a helicopter to pick them up. They had gone to the top floor of the teaching building to find a suitable landing platform, as the previous pharmacy location was not suitable. She even said that if they were allowed to leave, everyone could leave together. Barrett held the transmitter in his hand, but said that they couldn't summon a helicopter. He didn't want to foolishly invite danger after they had barely managed to deceive the chemical plant's extermination team. So the two siblings were kept locked up, and Barrett suggested expelling them from the school. However, others disagreed, saying that it would be tantamount to killing them. Barrett argued that at least it would be safer for the rest of them. Hearing this, Zoe showed signs of breaking down. She asked Barrett if he had thought the same way when dealing with the critically ill Sean. She wondered if he had been the one to kill her boyfriend, Sean. Barrett finally nodded in admission, explaining that Sean had requested it himself. Everyone was shocked, especially Zoe, who was in tears, but not the crocodile ones. Grover also angrily called Barrett a scumbag. Only Violet understood that if he hadn't done it, they might have all died, especially since Sean had already been gravely ill. Subsequently, Grover began to change as well. He realized that in order to survive, sometimes difficult choices had to be made. Barrett had grasped this concept long ago, and every decision he made was almost always the most beneficial for survival. Unfortunately, not everyone could understand him, and Zoe was one of them. She then managed to provoke Diesel to teach Barrett a lesson. Barrett quickly reacted, asking if he was supposed to be guarding the two siblings. Upon learning about his previous meeting with Zoe, Barrett sensed trouble and hurried to check. Unfortunately, he was a step too late. Zoe had already released the siblings, and she had joined forces with Zane and the newcomers. Taking advantage of Diesel's absence, Zoe quickly struck a deal with Anka. Together, they planned to take a plane to escape the place. Under the threat of a gun, Barrett had no choice but to hand over the signal transmitter. With Zoe as their guide, the group planned to avoid the freaks scattered around and head to the top floor of the teaching building to board a helicopter and leave. But they didn't get far before encountering freaks blocking their path. They had no choice but to take a detour through a long-abandoned storeroom. As they were going through the storeroom, a freak suddenly appeared. Anka fired a shot, attracting even more freaks. The group sped up towards the exit, with Zane covering their retreat. They finally reached the rooftop with some close calls, ready to call for the helicopter when they discovered the signal transmitter had been tampered with, and its main components were missing. As expected, pressing it yielded no response. Now they were in great trouble. Freaks were behind them, and they could only retreat through another entrance. Zane stayed behind again to cover their escape, but this time it didn't go as smoothly. A woman from their group rushed to help Zane, ultimately losing her life to the freaks and allowing Zane and the rest to escape. The remaining members knew they had to leave before the helicopter arrived, or they risked being killed by armed personnel from the chemical factory. Just as Grover and the others were about to open the door, Anka's group stopped them, demanding to know the whereabouts of the transmitter components. Barrett looked confused, insisting he hadn't done anything. Frustrated by their failed escape and the death of their teammate, Anka got upset and was about to shoot Barrett when Grover quickly intervened, admitting he had sabotaged the transmitter. He didn't want the people in blue to come to the school. Infuriated, Zoe cursed at Grover, while others searched his bag for the missing components. They accidentally found a photo of the people in blue's mission, revealing that the target of the chemical factory personnel was Grover alone. Everyone was shocked, even Violet, who blamed Grover for keeping the truth from them. At this point, Zane joined in, revealing that Grover's parents worked at the chemical factory and his father was the lab head responsible for the explosion. People started blaming Grover for everything, and eventually even Diesel and Violet turned their backs on him in disappointment. What mattered most to Grover was his girlfriend, Violet. He explained that his first thought upon seeing the photo was to figure out why the people in blue wanted him, and he didn't mean to hide anything. But heartbroken, Violet declared that she could no longer trust him. In the end, she sided with Anka's group, forcing Grover to leave the school. Instead of begging to stay, Grover quietly told Violet not to trust them as he prepared to leave the building alone. Suddenly, Barrett, carrying his luggage, called out to Grover, intending to leave with him. He knew that staying at the school with this group of unreliable teammates would only lead to disaster. The two of them then started an ambulance and drove through the thick smoke and heavy rain on the road, planning to leave the freak-infested town behind. Violet and her group at the school were now at a disadvantage in terms of numbers. To make matters worse, Anka had a stubborn attitude, making their situation even more difficult. She accidentally discovered the students' personal files and foolishly read out their dark past over the broadcast. The reason Diesel had claustrophobia was because he had been locked in a basement by his father for many days when he was a child. Anka's reckless actions sparked outrage. Ollie hurried to find his sister, scolding her for her actions and asking if she was trying to get them killed. Unexpectedly, Anka chose to fight back, bringing up how Ollie's girlfriend had abandoned him in the past. This deeply hurt him, and the siblings broke off their relationship. In front of everyone, Ollie joined in criticizing his sister and took out a bottle of wine to celebrate the fact that they were still alive. After everyone had finished drinking the wine, they fell asleep, only to wake up and realize they had been drugged. Anka knew that this was the drug her brother usually used, which had a strong hypnotic effect. The signal transmitter in their baggage had also disappeared, suggesting that Ollie planned to escape alone. After summoning his family's helicopter, Ollie told the pilot that his sister had died and that he was the only survivor. He then left the building on his own, leaving everyone behind. After this incident, the people in the school building became even more disunited. Anka, who had been treated like an outcast, couldn't get along with Violet and her ex-boyfriend, Zane. Diesel was used to being alone, and it seemed like their group was on the verge of collapsing. On the other hand, Grover and Barrett also encountered trouble. The highway tunnel out of town had been sealed off, obviously the work of the chemical factory. Barrett suggested that they should try other routes, but Grover proposed to go back and check his home first. To his dismay, his house had already been reduced to ruins during the explosion. Although he had been mentally prepared for this, Grover couldn't help but cry. It meant that everything he once had was gone. Now, Grover's primary goal was not to leave town, but to find out why he had become a target for the chemical factory. This might have something to do with his parents. Barrett suggested they should go to his house to investigate. They arrived at Barrett's house, which was relatively far from the chemical factory and was well preserved. Suddenly, they heard a noise from the bedroom. Grover opened the door to discover a homemade motion sensor toy. Barrett then took a computer from a safe and handed it to Grover. It contained information about the chemical factory explosion that he and a hacker friend had collected previously. Grover couldn't believe it was true. It turns out that the chemical factory was conducting experiments on living people and was now hunting down the town's survivors to cover up their tracks. Barrett asked Grover to look at the last page of the information, which had a handwritten signature that was an abbreviation of Grover's last name. This meant that the person in charge of the live experiments was Grover's father. It took Grover a long time to accept that his father could do such heinous things. Barrett asserted that the information was obtained by hacking into the chemical factory, so there was no need for forgery. However, Grover would rather believe that Barrett was lying than accept that his father was responsible for the experiments. Barrett found this somewhat amusing. He had now completely dismissed the idea that Grover was involved in his father's experiments after seeing Grover at home and had shown him the information for that reason. As the two were arguing, they suddenly noticed a light not far away. They were unsure of what choices they would have to make next or what fate awaited those who stayed at the school. Later in the town, the two wandering around noticed a light in a nearby house. They decided to go and investigate, but upon entering, they found that the light had already been extinguished. As they carefully searched each room, a freak suddenly jumped out. Fortunately, it was restrained by a chain and couldn't cause any harm. Just as Grover decided to leave, a smelly girl appeared. She was the neighbor who had grown up with Barrett. The chained freak was her younger brother. Her parents had gone to seek help a few days ago, but hadn't returned yet. Grover advised her not to turn on the lights, as it might attract trouble. He then tried to turn off the TV, but the girl stopped him, not wanting to miss any news announcements. While they talked, the girl had already cooked a steak, which was meant for her freak brother. However, she was disappointed once again as he didn't seem interested in cooked food. Grover thought the girl was delusional, advising her to let go and leave the place. However, she insisted that her brother was just sick and that a cure would eventually be found. She asked Grover to check on her brother after he finished eating the steak. Reluctantly, Grover headed towards the room. At that moment, the TV suddenly received a signal. The authorities announced that the town was in a state of emergency and survivors could go to the rescue center for help. Barrett wanted to take the girl with them, but he discovered a dog leash on the table. He asked her about her dog, and she didn't hide the fact that her brother needed to eat. When they heard a noise from the room, Barrett rushed in. It turns out the girl had untied the freak, hoping for Grover to become her brother's food. Seeing her plan exposed, she tried to stop Grover from killing the freak. In the chaos, Grover was accidentally knocked down by the freak, and the girl ended up being eaten by her own brother. Grover and Barrett escaped the room and quickly got into a car. Barrett couldn't understand how his innocent childhood playmate had become like this. Grover comforted him, saying that it was not strange at all, considering his own father had been conducting experiments on living people. Barrett fell silent. They started the car and, following the news announcement, arrived at the rescue center. From a distance, they could see rescue facilities, personnel, and even soldiers guarding the area. It didn't seem like a scam. However, their recent experiences had taught them to be cautious. Instead of going directly for help, they decided to investigate the situation. Taking advantage of a shift change, they sneaked into a tent, changed into spare uniforms, and openly wandered around. The signal was normal here, and they could receive news from the outside world. The news from the outside world reported that an attack led to a toxic gas leak at a chemical plant, resulting in 20,000 deaths in the small town. Barrett knew that the truth was being covered up, as there was no mention of the zombie attack. The report also mentioned Ollie, who was successfully rescued, claiming his sister had died and no one survived from the local school. Upon hearing this, Grover was stunned. In fact, this was just an excuse for Ollie to escape on his own, as Violet and the others were not dead. However, they were now not far from being wiped out. Time rewinds to one day earlier. The experimental man, who secretly infiltrated the school, killed the skateboarder, and stole his gun, returned to his residence. He told his companions that he had found a good place, and now they were living in a temporary warehouse. An experimental girl in the group had a scar on the back of her neck just like the man, likely from the chemical plant's laboratory. The woman was special. When the freaks approached her, she would have a seizure. The other two were ordinary staff members. The woman had a good relationship with another girl named Haley, and they wanted to kick their arrogant leader, Thug Boss, out of their group. After learning that only a group of young people were at the school, Thug Boss and his men barged into the school. A flying knife injured the blue-haired girl. Realizing how powerful their opponents were, Diesel led everyone into a shelter. The experimental man tried to open the door but failed. Thug Boss blocked the door with an iron bar, intending to trap the occupants inside. When Diesel realized they couldn't open the door, everyone panicked. Zane counted the people and found that 2 of them hadn't made it inside, one of them being Violet. It turns out Violet was alert to the danger and hid in a classroom with Anka the moment things went wrong. They overheard the conversation between Thug Boss and his group. Thug Boss wanted to continue searching for the survivors, but the rest of the group objected. They argued that it was already too much to take over someone else's residence and that there was no need to exterminate everyone. Thug Boss mocked them, saying that those survivors were just a bunch of kids. Violet realized that her priority was to save Zane and the others, but there were intruders guarding the hallways. Although Violet could use the terrain to her advantage and escape, she needed to plan carefully to rescue the others. She then found an old bow and arrow for Anka to use, while she prepared a stun gun to deal with the upcoming crisis. Haley, one of the intruders, didn't like violence and approached the experimental girl, suggesting they leave. However, she understood the situation and knew that without the protection of the experimental man and Thug Boss, they would be close to death. Meanwhile, Thug Boss was practicing his knife skills and noticed Violet standing in front of him. She knocked him down, but decided not to kill the unconscious leader. Anka went to the basement and encountered the experimental man at the entrance of the shelter. She shot an arrow at him, but it barely pierced his skin. Surprised by his resilience, Anka ran for her shitty life. Soon, she and Violet met Haley at a corner. Unexpectedly, Haley ran with them, and they temporarily escaped from the experimental man. Haley said he meant no harm and just wanted to leave with the experimental girl. Since their goals did not conflict, they could choose to cooperate. Violet then came up with a plan. She pretended to have Haley as a hostage, approached Thug Boss, who had just woken up. She proposed to exchange Haley for her friends in the shelter. Thug Boss immediately objected, but the experimental girl was concerned about Haley and began to argue with him. As the two groups were locked in a stalemate, Anka unlocked the door to the shelter and successfully rescued Diesel and the others. They all hurried to the room where Violet was negotiating. Thug Boss insisted on not letting Zane and his crew go, even going against the experimental girl's objections and attacking impulsively. Zane and the others rushed in upon hearing screams, only to find poor Violet dead. Although they were furious, they dared not fight the powerful experimental man. Just as they were about to leave, Haley suddenly grabbed a pistol on the table and aimed it at Thug Boss. However, she didn't dare to kill, instead shooting the glass to intimidate them. Suddenly, the experimental girl collapsed, a sign that freaks were approaching. In the next moment, countless freaks were attracted by the gunfire and broke through the windows. Thug Boss was the first to suffer. The experimental man blocked the freaks, urging Haley to take the experimental girl and flee. After Diesel and his group escaped, they locked the room's door. Zane wanted to take revenge on Haley and Diesel, but they quickly explained that they were all on the same side and wanted to fight against the unscrupulous chemical factory. Diesel reminded everyone that they had inhaled toxic gas when the windows were broken, and the scene finally calmed down. Then, to the experimental girl's surprise, the experimental man who had just been lying on the ground had disappeared. Meanwhile, at the rescue center, Grover was overwhelmed with guilt. He should have brought his companions with him when he left. Barrett suggested that they should focus on finding evidence of the chemical factory's crimes and exposing it to the public. They soon arrived at a morgue, where the corpses showed no signs of mutation but had injection marks. Barrett discovered that the drugs on the table were the same as those used by the fake rescuer, John. They quickly realized that this place was not a real rescue center, but a trap set up by the chemical factory and the authorities to lure witnesses. Barrett wanted to post the evidence online, but discovered that the computer was connected to the internal network of the chemical factory. After cracking the password, they found complete experimental data. Experiment Group 1 was too aggressive and abandoned. Experiment Group 2 had side effects but was usable, and Experiment Group 3 needed to be recovered. The experimental man and the experimental girl might have come from Groups 1 and 2. Suddenly, Grover wondered if he was from Experiment Group 3. Just then, they heard a noise outside and quickly left the morgue, rushing towards the rescue center. However, their suspicious behavior soon aroused the soldiers' suspicions, and they had to run. Unexpectedly, Grover was shot in the leg and fell, and Barrett could only watch helplessly as Grover was captured by the soldiers. Losing another companion in front of his eyes, Barrett returned to the car in despair, overwhelmed by regret and guilt. Suddenly, a figure appeared. It was Grover, who had just parted ways with him. After getting in the car, Grover seemed like a different person, constantly accusing Barrett of the crimes he had committed, causing the death of classmates like Sean and his neighbor. As Barrett tried to explain, he led Grover into an abandoned hardware store, a hidden base of the Hacker Alliance, aiming to expose the conspiracy of the chemical factory. But Grover suddenly laughed at Barrett, saying that Barrett had caused the explosion at the chemical factory and used the radio to attract the factory's pursuit, leading to the death of innocent companions. As the evidence piled up, Barrett broke down. At this moment, Barrett's hacker friend appeared, and Grover vanished. As it turned out, it was just an illusion created by Barrett, but everything he said was indeed his deepest secrets. Back at the school, the survivors gathered together and wrote the name of their deceased companion, Violet, on the wall. Suddenly, the experimental girl collapsed again. Since they had all inhaled toxic fumes, it meant that someone among them was undergoing mutation. The scene then shifted to Grover, who had been shot and was now waking up on an operating table. A figure approached his bedside, and it turns out it was his father, the possible mastermind before the toxic gas experiments. And this concludes Season 2 of The Freakish. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.